Dear Ethel, I've made up a presentation for you and I'm excited to show it to you today and have the chance to pick up my autographed book. We'll start here. Family and Foe, The Horrors of Sketa Beach. 2017 is when I was there. I began my genealogical journey just 3 years after my father passed away in Los Angeles. I was 55 when I went to Latvia. And here is my story. But one of the most important elements of finding out more about my relatives was doing my DNA test. Lo and behold, I am 100% Ashkenazi Jew. I'm very excited about that too. Everything that I do is in honor of my parents. They were so wonderful. My dad, Irv, was just the most loved man. He was a school teacher for 47 years, mostly grade 5 and 6. And my mom, she worked part-time at Sears, which is like Macy's or Myers here. They've passed away now, and I'm still very sad. My dad's mother was Etta. She helped raise us. I have two sisters. One sister, Lynn, who lives in Los Angeles, who's my best friend, and our other sister, Lori. Unfortunately, she became a devout Mormon and moved to Utah, and we don't really hear from her. But Grandma Etta, she was a matriarch of my family. She grew up a little bit in Labau. She came to America when she was 6. And her parents were Yetta Schwartz and Abraham Schnitt. Abraham Schnitt was a Lithuanian immigrant. He had 2 children when he came to Labau and 6 more children with Yetta. One of the most incredulous things that I found out on my journey to Latvia was that my grandmother was a twin. Her very favorite brother, Dave, my uncle Dave, was her twin, and she never knew. My grandma Yetta's dad was very tenacious. He came over in 1905 to New York with his eldest daughter, Jenny, to get the lay of the land. He told the family that the streets were paved with gold, and off they went in 1906 back to New York. He had a tailor shop in the garment district of New York off of Lexington Avenue, and I found him in a business directory, so he must have been doing well. But when his son came over from Latvia a few years later, after he had been arrested and put in a Siberian war camp, his health was so poor he had tuberculosis, and so the family moved to Los Angeles. And the photo in the lower right is him standing on West Jefferson, so between downtown LA and Beverly Hills on Mid Wilshire. His wife, Yetta, is pictured here in the center, and that's my grandma Etta, and Edie, my aunt, and Aunt Anne, and Aunt Jenny. This is a really gorgeous picture. It's around 1918. The other photo is of Joseph, the one that stayed behind in Latvia and fought the oppression and ended up coming to New York and Los Angeles a little bit later. Just recently, because of doing my genealogy, I found the grave sites of Yetta and Abraham. They're in East LA, and I'm going to be traveling there with another cousin in January 2022. And I'm really excited. We had never been there before. Abraham, unfortunately, he died in the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918 in the March. Only months later, my grandma Etta lost her little baby, who she named Abraham, to the Spanish flu pandemic as well. Great-grandma Yetta, she ended up living till 1948, which is a good long time, but I never met her because I was born in 1959. In 2017, Alan and I were on a home exchange in Germany for 2 months, and we went on a Baltic cruise in the September. When it finished in Copenhagen, we flew to Palanga in Lithuania and taxied across to Labau, and we were only able to stay just 4 days. We needed more time. We flew on Scandinavian Airlines on a fast jet. The view was tremendous, and you can see the sign on the road as we crossed into Latvia. The flight took about 1 hour. Our first stop was our hotel. It was the Hotel Labava. It's a very historic hotel on the canal because it was also used as a Nazi headquarters. And you can see the Ambers Stadium and Event Center behind it. I like this picture of an aerial shot of the canal. The Labava is right near the bridge crossing, and of course to the north is where you would have went when you visited the docklands and saw where the ships came and went. Obviously, both of our families would have traveled from there out into the Baltic Sea to Liverpool and then on to their destinations. Staying at the Labava was really amazing. As you can see out the windows in the foyer, we could see the canal. We were there in the first week of October, so it was fall and a bit gloomy. The first night I got there, Ziggy picked me up and took me on a walking tour. I was still under the illusions that I would see Jewish communities in Latvia. I was sorely mistaken. You would have seen that small monument on the sidewalk that was paying tribute to the synagogue there on the right, which was destroyed by the Nazis. I started to get the picture that there were no Jewish people left in Latvia. The second place we walked to was the building where Jews were hidden. I believe that it was Alana's parents that were hidden there as well. The next day, Gunners and Madra picked me up. Gunners is a professor at the university. He doesn't speak any English, so he brought along Madra, who was a Year 9 English teacher. So she did all the translating. We're sitting in the Hotel Labava mapping out our day. We drove down the boulevard to find my ancestors' homes. They're from the late 1890s and in the Soviet style. They seem to be made of paper that would just come apart in your hand, but people still live there today. When they took us out to Sketa Beach, I had some knowledge of a massacre, but I had only been learning my history about it on the cruise before I got there. So when they took us through the memorial, it was a very windy, cold day, and I kind of was compelled to leave Alan talking to them, and I walked straight through the memorial and onto the beach. This is just an aerial view of the memorial and the forest behind, where the atrocities occurred on a number of occasions. First, when they killed the women and children, and then when they moved their bodies into the forest to hide their evil acts. I really liked when I saw a photo of you in the same spot as me. I left the tour guides and I came out to the ocean. I often do that when I'm traveling. I like to, get near the ocean, and especially one that I haven't seen before, like the Baltic Sea. But I was really drawn, and when I stood out there, I looked around and I saw thousands of little stones on the sand, but they seemed to be glinting like as if they were in sunshine, and they were white and beige and gray and black. And I looked around and I said, "Hello, ladies." And then I stopped myself because I didn't know why I said such a thing. And then I picked up a stone, and it was black in the shape of a love heart with a small inclusion, and I wiped it off on my jeans, and I kissed it and put it in my pocket. Later that night, after visiting Sketa Beach, I suffered a terrible illness, and I thought I wouldn't be able to go on the tour the next day, but I felt better by the morning. And the tour guide said that lots of people get physical illness and ailment after being on such sites of trauma. I don't know if that happened to you or not, but it certainly happened to me. Once we did go to the memorial, we needed to come back to the cemetery because on our first visit to the cemetery, we took a quick glance at the memorial wall. And I was quickly looking for any surnames like Schnitt or Swartz, but I didn't have a clear view or memory yet of all of my relatives' names. So I went to the Jewish Museum and met with Alana in person, just like you would have. Isn't her office amazing? It's quite fancy, really. She sent me back to the cemetery because she was able to look on her computer and point out irrefutably which of my cousins had perished at Sketa Beach and at the lighthouse earlier in the year. You can see the Schwartzes. There was no Schnitz because Great Grandpa Schnitt's brother, who I had never heard of, died in 1931 before the atrocities, thank goodness. When I found out about Uncle Schnitt, I realized I had a memorial from my Aunt Edie that mentioned something about a strange alcoholic brother. And I went back to the um, memoirs and I found it. And of course, and then I was able to find a photo of him, and Alana organized for us to go back out to the cemetery and do a prayer over his grave. You'll see his grave is unmarked, and it's my goal, like you probably already have done, is to reinstate a headstone. When I was in Alana's office again, she showed me on her computer that these Schwartz relatives that had died, how they were interrelated. And it started to make sense with my family tree. It hit me very hard to see that There were two children amongst them, Mary and Eric, who were only 11 and 9. When I was starting my genealogy, the first person I hired was Rita in Riga. She was pretty upset I never got to Riga, but we just didn't have enough time. I know you got there and you were very lucky. I wish I did, and I hope I get there one day again for sure. She did a great job in piecing my family together. The other people that were really helpful was the travel agency right in Leopold. She helped hook me up with my tour guides and set a plan for me and pick my hotel. I couldn't have done it without her either. She must have a very hard job promoting Leopold as a holiday beach destination with its horrible history. In my family memoirs, they called Leopold the Paris of the East. Lots of travelers came from Europe and London and vacationed there, and the Jews were very much tolerated, except for over the Easter high holidays. Then they needed to stay at home because they could face some attacks and victimization. Other than that, during the year, the Jewish people were allowed to ride their bikes and go to the communal bath and go to the stadium for concerts as well. Again, this is Madra and Gunners in the Labava, keeping in mind that my family left in 1906, well before the Holocaust. So I really didn't know that the Holocaust was going to come so prolifically into my research when I started in 2017. As I said, my family had never really discussed it, and when the newsreels were shown to me in high school, I would walk out because I would be so traumatized. I liked Ziggy, who took me on my walk. He took me on my walking tour, and we also went to where the Tsar stayed in 1903. And that was a turning point for many families to leave there because when he came, people were gathering in the parks, and he came with his Cossacks on horses, and they drew swords, and they even cut across my Uncle Joseph and tore his coat. And he was with my Aunt Edie, and they ran home, and it was a very dangerous situation. Edward Anders, I would assume you've heard of him. He was 14 when the atrocities occurred, and he's written prolifically about Sketa Beach ever since. He's about 96 years old now, I think, and I've communicated with him via email a couple of times. Again, these are the fellas, Edward and Marcus, who were helping me in the cemetery. Couldn't you believe that how nice the cemetery looked on the right-hand side for the Catholics and the Lutherans, and how destroyed the Jewish side was? It was terrible. I had a spare day where Madra and her friend, who both spoke English, came and picked me up in the car, and we drove an hour out into the hinterland outside Leopold. It was absolutely beautiful. The fall colors were like the New England states in America. I said, I want to take you out to lunch, so I took them to this restaurant called Bangert's, where they promptly ordered salad topped with bull's balls. And I kept saying, what's a bull's ball? And they said, bull's balls. And I'm like, no, I don't know. And so they made a cup-like gesture with their hand, like the balls of a bull. Anyways, I did not try this delicacy at all. I wanted to show you that the restaurant was on the Venta River, or the Venta Rapids, which actually has a really um, salient history behind it. The bridge that you see, which is not a photo I took, is the longest bridge of its kind and was built in 1874. It was a major trade route, um, from Russia down through this area, and it crossed the Venta River, which, interestingly enough, if you look behind my shoulders there, you'll see the smallest, tiniest, yet widest waterfall in the world. And that's another picture of the bridge as well. They say that you can catch salmon just putting your hands out. They jump so high. And this area is where Koldinga was formed as a village. Unfortunately, the Jewish people there were terribly persecuted as well. I was taken in Koldinga to where this beautiful synagogue was before it was turned into a concentration camp and lit on fire. They have rebuilt it after the war. It was first built in 1875 as a synagogue for the Jewish community of Koldinga and served as such until 1941, when the Jews of Koldinga were killed during the Holocaust. What I didn't realize at the time was my family was from the Hasenpoth Aspute region, which is much closer to Liepāja than Koldinga by about a half hour. When I went inside the rebuilt synagogue, you can see from my face on the left, it was ghastly, knowing that it had been converted into a movie house and now a library was one thing, but the Jews were taken up those stairs, and that's where they were held till they were tortured. So it didn't leave us with a really great feeling, but the librarian, she went and did some work for me of any family of mine, Schwartz or Schnitt in Koldinga, and there was not any. After I visited with Alana, I worked continually on my genealogy. You know what a hard task it can be. You can work for weeks and weeks and come up with nothing and then have one glimmer of hope. My glimmer of hope was that one of my ancestors made it out alive in 1926 to Cape Town. I've told you about him. His name was Joe Schwartz, and finding him was pivotal to my research. It was really just the best thing that could have happened. And had I not visited Liverpool myself and gone into the central library there and met with the librarian, I might not have found him at all. I've been acquainted with my 4 cousins here. 2 are in Cape Town, 1 is in Israel, and 1 is in London. We just saw each other for the first time on Zoom in a meeting with Peter as they lended their voices for the film. They never knew anything about their Grandpa Joe's family. He was an alcoholic, he was sad, he was taciturn, but he married a really nice, bubbly woman named Sonia, who was the rabbi's daughter. And they lived in Cape Town and raised their family there. Well, they had one daughter who had 4 grandchildren, and he passed away in 1979. And I found his grave during my genealogy. And what happened was, is this family, the grandchildren that I showed you, they all went to Latvia like you and I did, but they came home empty-handed. Recently, when being audio recorded for Peter's film about Sketa Beach, I was able to hold this photo. This was given to me by my new cousin in London. So it's Joe's mother and her grandchildren. You remember I told you 2 relatives, young relatives, were killed at Sketa Beach. That was Eric, who was 9 when he was killed, and this is Mary, and she was 11. Joe would have never seen his mother again, or his brother, his sister-in-law, or their 2 children, but he would have known that they were murdered in 1941, and I think that's why he lived such a sad life, knowing that his family perished at Sketa Beach. He probably would have had survivor's guilt. This photo is from approximately 1934. When I was in Alana's office, she showed me some books in her bookshelf, and yours was one of them, and she made it sound so easy. Oh, you must find Ethel. She lives in Australia too, and she wrote a book. She can give you a copy because I only have this one copy and can't give it to you, and I need you to write a book just like it. Well, I haven't written the book yet, but I will. Certainly not as good as yours, and it's amazing, but it took me 3 years to find you. I want to say thank you for listening to my presentation, Ethel. You are my sister in spirit. Just to have been in the same place in Latvia is so amazing, isn't it? 2 people, 2 peas in the pod that we are, and now we've found Peter here in Brisbane, who's so dedicated to making a film of Sketa Beach and our ancestors' honor so that we never forget them. It's all quite amazing. I'm leaving now to go back to Los Angeles and visit my parents' grave. I haven't been to my mother's. She died 1 year ago today in Los Angeles, and I couldn't be there, but I made sure I could come see you today, and I will email you this video so you always have it and you can share it with your relatives. You've got all my details, and we'll keep in good touch, and hopefully I'll see you when I return in 2022. All the very, very best. The end.